Hello, I'm Dr. Steve Barrett, and I am the chairman of the board of Ipswich Aware, and we're doing the second in our series of presentations about issues for preventing substance abuse among teens in our community. Today, the topic is keeping our kids safe, and we're going to focus on two different things. The first is teen parties and issues around that. And then second, also about keeping kids safe, is all about harm reduction. So we'll introduce the parties as they get involved, but I now want to introduce Dr. Carl Soderlund, who's been very much involved with me in making these productions, and he has a story to tell.
So Steve and I talked about the best way to present this. And again, being in medicine, we always use case-based studies. So I created a case, and this is John and Jane Smith live in Ipswich with their 3 children. Anna's age 17, Tim's age 14, and Aaron is age 10. John is a software engineer, and Jane is a nurse practitioner. And by the way, this is all based on fiction. Names have not been changed to protect the innocent. I made all this up. But anyway, they live in Ipswich. Jane is a nurse practitioner. Neither smoke. Have an occasional beer or glass of wine or a glass of spirit. They used a little marijuana in college, but none since. Home life is good. Anne is an Ipswich High School junior, honor student, student government representative, runs cross country, plays the violin, and likes to babysit. She wants to go to college and she wants to become a journalist. She and her family have a good relationship. What you'd expect to see in a nice TV situation, this is a perfect family as you read about it. Tim is in 8th grade and plays hockey, and Aaron is in the 4th grade as a soccer player. It's a Saturday afternoon, and Anna says she's going to Jill Anderson's house that evening for a party. Her mom says, have a good time and be home at 11:30. So that afternoon, Jill Anderson's parents are away for the weekend, and her younger sister is staying at a friend's house. Jill and Anna plan an evening party for 10 friends, even though her parents are away. And she knew they probably didn't want her to do this. The party's planning to start at 7 p.m. with their 10 friends. However, very quickly, other kids start showing up. Many they knew, but many they didn't recognize. Some seemed as old as age 22. They looked older. Apparently, word had gotten out on social media, and there was a party at Jill Anderson's house. Kids came in carrying beer, small coolers. Some had marijuana, and several had speakers that played very loud music. Over the next few hours, the party became very loud, with kids laughing, going in and out of the house, some carrying beer, others smoking marijuana. Anna wondered about other drugs because some of the kids behaved somewhat oddly. There were beer cans in the yard. There were probably 50 to 75 kids in and out of the house, loud music playing, kids laughing, hollering. But it wasn't disorderly. It just was loud, and there were spirits being drank. Anna sees one of the kids passed out on the couch. Here's another vomiting in the bathroom. She sees a teen carrying hard liquor, having found Jill's parents' alcohol. The party is getting out of control. The neighbors have had enough. The noise is much too loud. They call the Ipswich police. The police arrive, turn on the blue lights. Kids start scrambling, some jumping into their cars, others running into the woods, some running into neighbors' backyards. The police see beer cans all around, inside and out. Anne and Jill are inside the house when the police come in. The police call an ambulance for the kid who's passed out on the couch. A very sick-looking student comes out of the bathroom with vomit on her sweater. Now, right at this point of note, there's no mention of Anna or Jill drinking or smoking marijuana. There's no mention of sex. There's no tragic car accident. The unconscious student wakes up in the ER feeling very hungover. There are no drug overdoses. There's no stabbings. There's no gunshots. There's nothing of what we hear in the news and the worst things we can happen. But the phone rings at 11:15 at the Smith's home. Mr. Smith answers and says, hello, and he hears, Mr. Smith, this is the Ipswich police. We have your daughter, Anna, at the police station. All our worst fears. Think about the consequences of this unchaperoned party of 10. Has Anna broken any laws? And what are the consequences if she did? Does this affect her ability to run cross country, be in the National Honor Society, be in student government, since many of these are organizations that look at character, not just at grades or at ability to run? What could have happened at this party? What could have happened to Anna? How, as a parent or as a student, could this have been prevented? I hope this sets the stage of what Steve's going to present in a minute, and then we'll hear from Dexter further. But this is the kind of thing that we were lucky in this story. Nobody got hurt. But, Steve.
There's a lot to unpack there, and I'm going to hopefully provide a framework to think about it because I think it touches on a lot of the things that parents fear worst. I think that's one of the things we worry about, preparing kids to make good, safe choices as they become more independent. But we all know they're going to test things for themselves and make mistakes. So this program is all about helping kids face the real dangers of alcohol and drug use, ways to set them up for success, and also helping them to avoid compounding their mistakes. So let's talk about parties. It's one word, but it's a bunch of different things. First of all, I think it's natural for kids to want to get away on their own together, enjoy themselves, and let loose on their own terms. But this creates a big worry for parents who need to balance letting go with a natural tendency to control and protect. There's no school for parenting, and we're all left to learn from the way we grew up and our own conclusions about how to approach this. To further muddy the water, there's several ways to look at just what we mean by party. Parents' traditional view most likely starts with permission from the host parents, invitations to attendees, a plan for the party, maybe a theme, and defined parameters. Kids want to get away from parental control and enjoy fun with their friends. There doesn't have to be much of a plan, and sometimes parties can just arise spontaneously and shift from location to location. The most worrisome sum of all these desires happens when kids are not supervised at all, especially if parents are away or not home. Fun for kids can vary from safe to unsafe activities. For some kids, a party is synonymous with alcohol and or other drug use, with no other activity required. Parenthetically, this is not exclusive to teens and college kids, but our societal norms actually assume alcohol consumption at most types of adult parties. So what message are we sending to kids by that? Kids know the laws against alcohol possession or use before 21 or other drug use and are adept at finding ways around them and avoiding detection if they are committed to indulging that way. They have questions for parents too about why they shouldn't try alcohol and drugs if their parents did, or try cannabis if it's now legal. Of course, they leave out the after 21 part. We need to be prepared with answers. And we also need to agree that it is not a good strategy to allow kids under 21 to use alcohol and other drugs even while supervised in the home because of the permanent medical harm that we now know that it can cause, as well as the conflicting message it sends to kids. But that's the point of view of an adult, a parent, a professional. Why don't we hear more about teen parties in Ipswich from a lifelong resident and 2022 graduate of Ipswich High School, Dexter Kerr, who was kind enough to join us tonight.
Thank you so much, Steve and Doctor. His example from the beginning I'd like to touch upon, no negative results or consequences coming from the party, despite it being an absolute disaster. The big thing that I think that we need to highlight in this day and age is kids, when they party, they're simply going to be doing some sort of drug nowadays. Unless it is a birthday party or they are celebrating something, any party referred by a kid or a teenager is going to involve drugs and alcohol. The rise in the amount of availability in such drugs has skyrocketed just over the past 5 years, and that's an entirely separate conversation. And that's just, my viewpoint from seeing, kids as young as 5th grade selling, nicotine and THC vaporizers in my hometown, you know? So stuff like that is what's kind of one part of the shift as to why are we having, you know, situations such as kids harboring in houses, you know? So with that comes the parent, and the parent not wanting the child to be at risk and being out of their imminent domain, such as their house. So I'd say over the past 20 years, the way the party scene has gone, it used to be, you know, certain locations out, you know, say in the woods, abandoned houses, or maybe a go-to spot if you're lucky in the parking lot. But now we see patterns just, you know, single houses being used for multitude of parties that are regulars, and even the school parking lot here in Ipswich is used as a spot to drink. Yeah, that is how cocky we have gotten, and it's kind of feeling like I from my perspective, I get the impression that kids are kind of fleeing from being more adventurous and harboring together and getting in larger groups and on a much more regular basis with drinking and stuff like that. So instances like that are happening on a regular basis, and I think the big point to talk about is anxiety around what could possibly happen to your child. So I would like to toss it over to Steve here to tell me more about the anxiety that parents will feel, you know, whether or not they let their child go out or not, you know, and what the parent actually knows what goes on nowadays and how things have changed.
Thanks, Dexter. Listening to you now, I'm really anxious. You're right. So let's talk about how we can best manage teen parties so kids can have enough freedom to let loose and try new things and have fun, but most of all, stay safe. Most of the work happens ahead of time through multiple short conversations over many years about the real risks of alcohol and other drugs, and the clear expression that parents do not want their kids to drink alcohol, do drugs, drink and drive, or engage in other risky behavior. Contrary to what we may feel, kids actually put more weight on parental preferences and advice than I think parents know, and that's the most influential factor. So multiple conversations about the harm potential and just helping them manage the risk. Speaking of that, we need to let them know they can and should call their parents to be picked up at any hour, day or night, if they find themselves in an uncomfortable or unsafe situation, using a safe word if necessary to save face. Or also if they've made a mistake and actually indulged, but need to get home safely. Follow-up discussions should always wait until the next day when everybody is calmer. But that safety net is critical. It really helps to use the discussions over the years to arrive at a simple family code, something that should be prominently displayed, that agrees on values and safe behavior for all family members. Examples for the code might be always treating others with respect, protecting our brains by avoiding alcohol and drugs before 21, and children and parents all agreeing to at all times make healthy decisions and avoid risky behaviors like drinking and driving or not wearing seatbelts. Or you could each sign a pledge, such as one published by the National Students Against Destructive Decisions organization that I have brought with me, or the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration has an agreement as well. But this one says, from the point of view of the teen, they sign off saying there are many potential destructive decisions they face, and they commit that they'll do everything in their power to avoid making decisions that would jeopardize health, safety, and overall well-being, or your trust in me. They understand the dangers associated with the use of alcohol and drugs and destructive behaviors often associated with impairment. And they pledged the best effort to remain alcohol and drug-free. I'm paraphrasing and trying to get through it quickly. The parents likewise agree that they're committed to their children and the children's health and safety, and pledge to do everything in their power to understand and communicate with them about all the many difficult and potentially destructive decisions that they face. Further, they agreed to provide safe, sober transportation home if they're ever in a situation that threatens their safety, and also pledging that they won't drive under the influence of alcohol and drugs and will seek safe transportation home and wear a seatbelt, such as we already said. So those are the kinds of agreements that I think really set the tone that can be carried by kids into a potentially wild party situation such as Dr. Soderlin has outlined.
Could I add to that real quick, if you don't mind?
Please do.
So, like a contract, like you said, it, you know, another way to word it too would be the trust between the parents and the child. And from my own experiences personally, when a child or teen gets away with something even as little as a white lie, they will, you know, take advantage of that. And so, keeping an iron fist on your, young teen is very important, as they're becoming a teenager, because they are, as you know, are going to try and get away with stuff. And, false trust is kind of what leads to those bad house parties and parents, having a very ignorant bliss view of their child, and I've seen it a lot firsthand, very close associates of mine in school, even friends who were very successful in school, still just had a layer, like a hidden life from their parents, and whether it's up to the parent to be as completely blunt as possible with their child when they do that and expose them to, the harsh reality that is the consequences of drugs and alcohol. Having that conversation is a matter of, the parent's choice and right timing, and that's kind of a part of the, problem, is figuring out when to really sit down and be, completely honest.
Yeah, I think that what is really important through all these conversations is getting sort of involved in your kid's life, being aware of what they're going through, being there for them. And that alone builds trust, but you're there observing at the same time as you're communicating about all the issues.
Yeah, and communicating the rewards, and as far as the farthest of negative consequences that come with, the choice that is drugs and alcohol. So, don't just tell your kid that it's really great if you don't do it. Tell them that it's a living hell if you do it, and slowly expose them to the real world that is self-destructive behavior. So highlighting that for your child, like I said, when you do that, no one can really say exactly, because that's the parent and the child, but doing it before you lose immediate control over your child, like influence. Say whether you have a young teenage boy, you're going to have to crack down on that much earlier, because they are going to become, when they hit puberty, they're going to become very aggressive, and that's kind of like the I would say, being a young boy and seeing kids around me, that's usually when the time's up. That's when their ears are going to be closed, and it's going to be hard to really explain to them some of the harsh realities of the world.
Well, I think you're right, and the discussions start probably around age 9 is what most experts are saying, and then continue right on up through college, and beyond.
I've been doing about 15 alumni interviews for Dartmouth College in the last few years, and these are bright and very accomplished students, and I ask each one of them how they've managed to get there. Two things: family and friends. They know what their family's expectations are, and they seem to know why, and they choose friends who have similar kinds of values. And so we as parents really can't ignore the importance we have setting the appropriate stage. And secondly, we need to know who their friends are. And we need to be able to help direct them. So it's very, very important. And the other thing that I chose not to include the immediate consequences that we all know are in the news all the time. A tragic car accident, a prom night, or sex that gets out of hand at a party. What we hope to have another session on is, and what more and more I'm concerned about, is over the last 10 years, the research has shown the developing brain, which continues to develop until about the age of 25. And it's drugs and alcohol at this age that may have permanent consequences on the brain that we really need to somehow make sure our kids know that this is part of it. It's not just because we don't want them to, but there's good reasons, whether they're the acute consequences or whether they're the consequences that you can't identify now. So.
Thank you for that. So the bottom line to what we've been discussing is that there need to be clear expectations about healthy choices, and as Carl just pointed out, the reasons for those healthy choices and behavior that are set in advance. So let's get down to some nitty-gritty about parties. And there are some helpful guidelines. First, for planned parties in your home. And it's most important that you remember that hosts and parents have a legal duty to keep their guests safe. That's a huge issue that you need to keep in the front of your mind. So working together with your teen, you should set a start and end time and place for the party. You should keep to invited guests only, a problem that cropped up at Carl's scenario, and limit it to a manageable number. Agree on a plan and party activities with your kids, and agree on the rules. There should be no tobacco, vaping, alcohol, or other drugs, and there should be no leaving and then returning to the party. And especially for overnight parties, consider taking the car keys. Keep the party to certain areas of the house and leave some lights on. And remember that guests not following the rules will be asked to leave. The teens need to agree to that. And that includes anybody who arrives inebriated. Also, parents, most important, parents need to be discreetly present 100% of the time. The trick being serve food frequently. And remove temptation just in case. Lock up the alcohol in the house, meds in the home, in the medicine chest, etc. And think about how to keep the kids safe, not leaving their drinks unattended. A couple of other issues to consider, given the party scenario these days, are fentanyl test strips and Narcan. And I'm going to leave that discussion to our next speakers because that's their strength, and I think they can tell us the most appropriate use of those. But always remember, if you leave your teens alone at home, have other adults keep an eye on them. Parties have a way of cropping up. Now, if your teens are going to a party at a friend's home, always know where your kid is going and for how long. Get the phone number and address, and have them always call if that changes. Let your teen know where you will be and how to reach you, and remind them of your established pickup agreement if they feel uncomfortable or need help. Help your team find comfortable ways to say no and practice them together beforehand. Sometimes it helps to have a party buddy to look out for each other, another friend. Make sure they have a concrete plan to get to and from the party safely. You need to know who's driving and what to do if they've consumed alcohol or drugs. And since impulsiveness and poor teen judgment sometimes lead them to try to misrepresent a friend's party plan, always coordinate with the supervising parents. Always call them ahead of time. Their views and rules need to be like the ones that we just outlined for your home parties.
I'd highlight, I just came across some information that young brains don't get sleepy with alcohol. Older brains get tired. They don't tend to get as much trouble. But young kids just don't get sleepy, so the results of driving and things like that are much more likely to happen.
Yeah, there's a lot to know that we will try to present at a future time about the effects of alcohol and drugs on adolescent brains that really brings this whole issue into focus about why it's a dangerous thing and leads to a lot of problems. But always review the party plan with the parents who are supervising the party, and make sure that their rules are like yours. No alcohol, drugs, tobacco, or vaping, to be sure. Make sure they're always going to be present and supervising. And some parent groups even make agreements and make written contracts about teen parties together in advance. So that's another thing to think about if you know your kids' friends and you know their parents. But this is a very important step that you shouldn't ignore out of concern for how others might interpret it. That communication with the other parents can be very critical to the safety of your child. But remember, the very best way to protect your teen at parties is to prepare them ahead of time with lots of little focused conversations throughout their childhood and adolescence.
I'd add right at that point, because I think it's much more likely our teens are going to have spontaneous or unplanned gatherings that become called parties, but they're when a group of kids get together. So these organized parties are probably less frequent than we're going to show up at the parking lot at the high school or something like that. So what you're getting into now, this having lots of conversations and setting expectation, really transcends all of this, and it's extremely important.
That's the key point. That's what you all have to remember. And you can get much more detail about how to have those conversations, what to say, what's important at the SAMHSA Talk They Hear You website. And they have conversations such as talking to your teen about cannabis, about opioids, about vaping, about the dangers of underage or alcohol or drug use, about avoiding impaired driving. And very interestingly, if you download their app on your phone, you can actually collect and practice those discussions in advance just by yourself so that you can feel more confident in doing it. So that's the outline that I hope to present to describe ways of thinking about and preparing your kids for teen parties and trying to increase the chance that they can enjoy themselves safely. But now is the time for questions or any discussion that anybody would like to. Yes, please.
So I worry most about my child. He's not in college or anything yet, but like later on, when at college, getting handed something like fentanyl or something, and something extremely powerful that is just casually passed around, taking it, almost not knowing what it is.
So what would you have talked to your child about? Because that's where this all boils down to. I mean, Steve had mentioned that kids know the law, but they don't understand the consequences, and that's the challenge. You know, what happens now may affect what you want to do 20 years from now, whether it's a developing brain or a security clearance because you want to go into the government. How do you have that conversation? You're not going to have it once, but multiple times, because these brains can't quite, they just don't have the development yet to understand the consequence. Not that they're dumb, it's just there's not a connection between that part of the higher part of our brain that understands that there's issues of taking risk, and we need to continue. So we need to be that part of the brain for them all the time.
And I think you're raising a really good point that a lot of the time kids don't know what they're taking. And these days, with fentanyl being more common, it's cheaper than heroin, I'm told. And so it's going to be mixed with a lot of different drugs just for the economics of selling drugs. But the consequences are way more severe, as you, I think that's the underpinning of your question. So what do you do? And that's where Narcan and fentanyl test strips can be specifically helpful. But I tend to agree with Carl. If you can prepare your kid and just say, listen, you know, these days you just don't know, it's not worth the risk. And repeat that as many times as it takes.
Every time you hear a headlines, an overdose, and there are people who die in our town of overdose, or in the news, a car accident, you just spend, you know what? Never, ever, ever take anything anybody gives you, even if it's an Advil. You just don't know. That part can sort of be black and white, but what people have come back to me is, you don't know if someone's giving you a Coke, whether they put something in your Coca-Cola. So it really gets complicated about what kids can and can't ingest. Maybe they bring their own Coca-Cola or whatever, but it's just how many times over and over and over kids.
Well, I see what you're saying, being handed a Coca-Cola. So I think that touches upon something even more, something that can speak to the child even greater, which is the friends they are around. And before you get offered the fentanyl, you get offered to hang out with people. And who do you hang out with? Well, that's a conversation that you may want to have, a much more, you know, inviting and less polarizing one for sure, and then rather than talking about fentanyl, obviously. So I think, you know, and you know, the test strips are very useful, and in the college scene that I've had a peek in, I haven't seen it go to those heights. Maybe that's because I'm an underclassman, but it's definitely getting there close to that with the amphetamines for sure, which are still, yes, very dangerous and very addictive. So, but it really boils down to the friends that your child is hanging around, and the friends that they're hanging around from, I would just call it ages 6 to 12, is going to set them up for the rest of their entire future, I'd say. Having a consistent circle with very, you know, imprudent parent supervision is a very, very good recipe for a child you can trust and not have to be on so much in their high school years, you know, really making your face, putting your face in theirs, you know. I mean, you know, sometimes I'll see nowadays it's kind of the opposite, you know. Some kids will have babysitters when they're younger, and then their parents will push them to help them understand more important concepts. It's really hard to teach kids really complicated concepts when you have such, you know, immediate positivity coming from these drugs, but then such complicated consequences and negativity coming from it. It's like, what's the brain going to focus on more? You know, the child's brain. It's
We've
gonna
heard
be
two
the simple
things.
thing.
5th grade kids getting drugs, age 9 start talking. I think that's about the same. You start young.
You start young.
And it's frequent, small, in a positive way with some reasons. But you're right, they're not going to understand the how. They just need to know every time. I can't.
Knowing why is incredibly important, because knowing you can give a very well articulated essay on every reason why not to, and they will still ignore it because like that's just too much for them to care about, because they can, you know, if they take the drug, they'll get the satisfaction that they desire instead of the satisfaction out of knowing that you're better off not taking the drug, because that's a journey to understand the negativity and the, you know, the hell that it can bring on your life if you go down that path. And you got to drop those seeds in there before they even know what they're taking in, you know, because they just
and
take
once they've started, there's a whole bunch of biochemical reasons as well.
That's another conversation.
That make it all the harder.
Mm-hmm.
So really, I think our focus today is trying to keep them from getting too far into it.
Yeah,
in
and
the
so to
first
that,
place.
I'd say you just hammer on that word why, It's like, you obviously know why. You're much wiser. They know you're wiser. They don't care. So then ask them, like, do you know why? Like, ask them what they want, Give them the microphone and see how much your kid says and see how much sense they make.
And even on the short term, though, as I said, these are the things we didn't mention, but these are the things that are direct consequences. Unintended sex. I mean, we hopefully are talking to our kids about the consequences of sexual relations, but when you're under the influence of drugs or alcohol, you're more likely to have sex than you are not. Tragic car accidents. How many times does a community have a death in a tragic car accident? Oh, it can never happen again. This is how it never happens again, is because we continue to take little hits with our children. Look what happened. Isn't that tragic? You know what? They got in a car and someone was drinking and driving. Seatbelts. How many kids die in car accidents because they didn't have their seatbelt on and get thrown out of the car? You need, as a parent, to wear your seatbelts. You need to always hammer that home. Drug overdoses. We hear those all the time. You just keep hammering away, being very concrete. These are the consequences. Not necessarily your brain's not developed. They're not going to understand that. But these are the consequences of bad judgment. And the friend stuff is so important.
We've got one more question.
I guess it's partly a comment. I think the most important thing is to build a trust with your child and develop that relationship so that you can have conversations. I think it's really important to share that information with them, but also to know that they can get educated and they can be part of the decision-making process. I think we want to make sure that we are valuing their engagement in the process and honoring who they are. And I'm hearing what all of you are saying, but I think pushing so much of the negative can also push them away. So I think we just need to be really thoughtful about how the conversation happens.
I thank you for that comment. That's saying much better exactly what I was trying to say with the multiple conversations ahead of time. They don't have to be confrontational.
No.
They don't have to be
Based off of an
negative.
experience.
They don't have to be in your face. They have to be, let's talk about helping you grow up safely.
Yes.
Kids and parents will agree on that.
Yeah, stay them
And
away
then-
from hell.
And then,
That's what you don't want for your child.
so thank you for kind of focusing.
That's the fundamental question. How do you grow that trust? And that's, I think, what we're all about.
I think we should leave our part of the conversation just so we can leave some time for the next.
Sure. I have-
Yes,
Before
Silly.
we do, I have one question, though. How can a parent, are there things to look for in a child's behavior or response that might indicate that you're really not getting through and you've got a child that's going to take more risks than average, or are there any cues? I mean,
Yeah, that's getting into a fairly complex, detailed discussion. Certain behavior patterns, kids who are impulsive, so kids with hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, are more prone. Somebody who's going to act first, think second. And if you see that pattern, that would be more concerning. But I don't know a new way of, I think you just have to be more,
I know one.
hold on one second. You just need to be more diligent in making your points over and over again, because repetition will get across in that setting. What were you gonna-
The repetition piece, I say in a developing child, before the age of 11, 12, yes, that would work entirely. But to your question, I would just say, ask yourself, do you think they know why? Do you think they know why you're telling them this? Because if you can't, answer that quickly and with satisfaction, the likelihood is that they don't know why, and they are not on the same page with you. And so that means they either don't know it all, or think something else, or have their own reasons to do it, you know? So they can be justifying it by their own means depending on where they are in this stage of consumption or party going or anything like that. So it like he said earlier, you know, the Dartmouth graduates, the early admission not the graduates, but the people who got accepted into early admissions, their family was involved with them, and they knew why they were involved in their life. You know, the knowing why is what ties it all together, I believe.
But I think the hard part is in 7th grade, when they stop talking to you, they stop looking at you, you ask them how school, and you got to just continue building that relationship in spite. In fact, there's one of the sessions I think we'll have is on this brain and how to talk, how to get through this and how to encourage that. It's a very interesting thing that we've heard on, it's actually on the podcast on Talk They Hear You. Very interesting. I think it's number 8 or something. There's a 2-part woman who talks as a psychologist. But that's the hard part.
Well, out of respect for our other contributors, now we're going to turn from prevention of one kind to trying to prevent problems from trying to prevent problems from happening in the first place, to prevention of another kind that's also an issue for teen parties and beyond. Talking about harm reduction, a multifaceted process to prevent people who've slipped into substance abuse, despite our best efforts, from having the worst outcomes, so they can still have a chance to turn things around. And also to help in the party scene, as we've already promised. So I'm going to turn it over to the folks from the North Shore Health Project, One Stop. You guys can introduce yourselves, and I appreciate it.
Hello, everybody. So my name is Lacey Natty. I'm the program manager at One Stop Harm Reduction Program in Gloucester. We're part of the North Shore Health Project. The North Shore Health Project was founded in 1988 out of the AIDS epidemic, and in 2016 we founded One Stop Harm Reduction Center out of the opioid epidemic. And Jen, you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you. I'm Jen Holmgren. I'm a registered nurse, and I work at One Stop in the North Shore Health Project. One Stop is an acronym, a quasi-acronym, and it stands for Outreach, Needle Exchange, Sexual Health Testing, and Overdose Prevention, and that's basically everything that we do. And I want to thank Dr. Barrett and Dr. Soderland and Dexter. We have a PowerPoint presentation that we're going to make available to Ilya so that she can post it on the Ipswich Aware website. And there is a lot of overlap in our two conversations.
Yeah.
But Lacey and I will be discussing what harm reduction is. We will delve a little bit into teen brain development and having conversations with kids, as well as building resilience.
And before we dive into our slides and what harm reduction is, just to jump off, I just want to say that I think the gentleman did a really good job of expressing just having those short conversations, frequent conversations with your child. I'm in my 30s now. I was not too long ago a teenager. I come from a great family, trauma history there. I still went out and partied, and if it wasn't for my parents and a good circle of friends, I just think that is the most important thing to drive home, is having that family base and building those trusting conversations and having those really difficult conversations that your kid is like, not right now. That is of the utmost importance, and something that our participants that are in active drug use, I don't think always got. So I think that's a really important thing to drive home, and I respect that you guys really brought that up. So a little bit of what harm reduction is. Does anyone not know what harm reduction is in here? I know we're tuning in too. So if you want to start.
Oh, sure. So the first slide is Harm Reduction 101, and this information is directly from the Harm Reduction Coalition website. It's incredibly informative, and for the benefit of those of you watching from home, thank you. Harm Reduction What is it? It accepts for better or worse that licit and illicit drug use is part of our world and chooses to work to minimize its harmful effects rather than simply ignore or condemn them. Understands drug use as a complex, multifaceted phenomenon that encompasses a continuum of behaviors from severe use to total abstinence, and acknowledges that some ways of using drugs are clearly safer than others. Establishes quality of individual and community life and well-being, not necessarily cessation of all drug use as the criteria for successful interventions and policies. Calls for the non-judgmental, non-coercive provision of services and resources to people who use drugs and the communities in which they live in order to assist them in reducing attendant harm.
It also ensures that, people who use drugs and those with a history of drug use, routinely have a real voice in the creation of these programs. We have a couple things hanging up at our drop-in, which you're welcome to come check out sometime if you want. But one of them that really resonates with us as a team is nothing about us without us. And that really just means that we really want to give the people that are making up this community a voice. And, if something's not working or if we're not getting correct education, and we're telling them, we learn from our participants. We learn just as much as you learn from your teenagers, and, they learn from you. It affirms people who use drugs themselves as the primary agents of reducing harms on their drug use and seeks to empower the person who uses drugs to share information and support each other in strategies to meet their actual conditions for use. So that can look a little different. We do have medication-assisted treatment access on site. So if someone on site says, I'm interested in methadone, I'm interested in Suboxone, right then and there, we have the ability to get them that. It's really important to kind of strike while the iron's hot, so to speak, when they're ready to go. That being said, on the other end of the harm reduction spectrum, when someone is ready for detox, we're more than happy to call and make those calls with them. Harm reduction recognizes the realities of poverty, class, racism, social isolation, past trauma, sex-based discrimination, and other social inequalities affect both people's vulnerability to and capacity for effectively dealing with drug-related harm. And finally, does not attempt to minimize or ignore the real and tragic harm and dangers that can be associated with illicit drug use. So, we don't condemn, we don't condone, we just kind of, another saying that we have, we meet them where they're at. So that's something that we can kind of tie into this talk about working with your teenagers. Sometimes you got to meet them where they're at. So why do people use substances? To cope with trauma, to dissociate, to disconnect from reality. I think one of the main things that we see with our participants is past family traumas. Others around them are using, like we touched on in their friend group. Pain, and lastly, it can be fun. And that's what we have to realize, is that sometimes kids are doing drugs because it is fun sometimes, so to speak, I don't know if anyone else wants to chime in why else people might use drugs. We touched on most of them. So we did go into adolescent brain development. I know you said you were probably going to have another talk on this down the line, so if you just want to quickly kind of touch on these points. I think we kind of went over them, just that, the brain is still developing in those adolescent years. I know Dexter was really good and mentioned the adolescent ages, specifically 11 to 12, even sometimes earlier. That is when the brain is developing, and, the back of the brain going forward to the front is still forming. Old nerve pathways are pruned to make room for new ones. And kids' brains are very elastic during this time period. They're primed to new activities, make new friends, and learn faster than they ever have before. Adding a substance to that, as the doctors and Dexter touched on, is going to detriment that brain process. As elastic as they are.
Right, and it can actually affect the formation of those nerves because they're forming so quickly, and because, well, we'll get into this in a couple of slides, but front to back is extremely important to remember in brain development. It's fascinating.
So we have a little cross-section of the brain here. Just says, the cerebrum, the cerebral cortex controls impulse, learning, and memory. The limbic system, kind of that reward system that we all like, the emotion and the fight or flight response too. So just something to be aware of what is actually going on up there. You want to touch on these ones?
Sure. Yeah, so I do not have 12 years of education. I'm not a physician, I'm a nurse, so please forgive me. But I wanted to just touch on development of the limbic system versus the frontal lobe and why the two differ. So the limbic system is sort of the primal section of the brain. It's in charge, again, of the fight or flight response. The frontal lobe is part of the cerebrum, which is the big squiggly foldy part of the brain that's on the outside, and it's what most of us think of when we hear the word brain. And the frontal lobe, and I always think of my forehead when I think of the frontal lobe, is the CEO of the brain. It controls our decision making, it regulates impulses and emotions, it regulates them. Beginning in the preteen and early adolescent years, the limbic system gets an overhaul. So the frontal lobe takes longer to catch up. So this is why teens are often referred to as emotional, because they are. The limbic system is kind of going crazy, and the frontal lobe is like, whoa, wait, what are you doing? What? So anyway, I have a 12-year-old who's in 7th grade, and so far she's still talking with me and she's still engaging, but she's getting a little grunty too when I ask her how school was. So basically, as far as substance use goes with teens, and this can be really anything. I mean, addiction is so prevalent in our society, and you can become addicted to a lot of different things, just from habit, or I don't know, eating a lot of sugar or drinking a lot of caffeine. That's an addiction too, and I will fully cop to that. But basically, with respect to the teen brain, it's as if a teenager's brain has a fully functional car accelerator, but the brakes have not been installed yet. That's what psychologist David Walsh wrote. So in certain situations, emotion can dominate rational thought, even if a teen is usually able to think things through. And if a teen or preteen starts using or doing drugs while brain changes are happening, it's more likely they will struggle with substance use disorder throughout their lives.
Did you have a question, Dexter?
Yeah, I just wanted to, use my teen intellect and just let you know all of the limbic system is, whenever a teenager says they're anxious, that's just that part of the brain firing off nonstop, And that's them admitting that they don't know. They may say they know they're anxious, but they don't really know. Mm-hmm. So that's them admitting defeat, more or less.
Aw, it's hard to learn how to process those emotions and even identify them sometimes. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, but that's just good for the, that's the word that's used a lot nowadays is, I'm very anxious. And that is what our primal instincts are, is anxiety, being prepared for what's to come. So just, know that's kind of what that is. Don't treat it like anything else. That's all I'd say to parents.
Thank you.
So we touched on this a little bit in the beginning when we first started, some risk factors for substance use. Of course, a family history of substance use, including parental. So of course, if someone's growing up and their parent is a functioning alcoholic that drinks a, pint of vodka every day, they're going to grow up thinking that might just be the norm. So taking into your own addictions that you have, even if it's something like caffeine or cigarettes, vaping, cannabis use, that's going to be a direct mirror to your children. That being said, lack of family support around sexual orientation or gender identity is a huge risk factor. Lack of school community connectedness. A lot of the times in our field, you'll hear the term that addiction is the opposite of connection. And so I think that's really important, and one of the things that we try to really do at our drop-in is make it all-encompassing and welcoming and non-judgmental atmosphere, and just meeting them where they're at. Even if they're having the worst day and the worst attitude, they're allowed to have a bad attitude. Decreased parental monitoring that the gentleman talked about, childhood sexual abuse, of course, childhood trauma, and mental health issues. I would add in past injury. If I think we're kind of moving away from this as a society, over prescribing opiates, but being a teenager in the early 2000s, OxyContin was rampant and completely overprescribed. And even though we're moving away from that overprescribing mode, I think that's still something to be aware of, and depending on their age or just their physician, whatever that may be. All that said, you have the power. According to Barry Walsh's 2015 Harvard University article, The Science of Resilience, there is a common set of characteristics that predispose children to positive outcomes in the face of adversity. And I know, again, like Jen said, a lot of this is overlapping, but for the sake of this conversation, and I can't stress this enough, and I was really happy that this was stressed too by the doctors in Dexter, that the availability of at least one stable, caring, and supportive relationship between a child and an adult caregiver is that should be the bread and butter of the relationship. A sense of mastery over life circumstances, strong executive function and self-regulation skills, and the supportive context of affirming faith or cultural traditions.
You have the power. As was said, it's okay to be open and honest with your teen in conversations about substance use. I mean, you don't have to be completely open, but certainly you can factor in your own experiences. I think teens appreciate honesty. Kids are very smart. They can tell when you're lying. They can tell when you're beating around the bush. You don't have to be completely candid, but certainly in my own conversations with my daughter, I've talked with her about why I've made the choices that I've made, and my husband has too. And I mean, I'm not sure how much gets in there, but you know that they're thinking about it. And again, it goes back to the multiple small conversations. I mean, it can be the car conversations. They're really magic. You're driving along, listening to music. Suddenly, oh, well, this happened at school today. Oh, okay, well, how did that make you feel? Et cetera, et cetera. Again, presenting factual information is extremely important. Googling things together. Real information from trusted grown-ups is more powerful than rumors or exaggerations from peers, hopefully. Try to avoid scare tactics. Anecdotally, I've heard from a couple of one-stop clients who have said, believe it or not, when the lectures happened in school, health class surrounding substance abuse, drug paraphernalia, how drugs make you feel, they actually said, well, that made me want to try it more. So it seems counterintuitive to us, but as a kid who maybe was a little more predisposed for whatever reason to taking risks, that's something that we really have to think about. And speaking of risks, kids are risk takers, but they thrive when the negative risks are replaced with positive ones, such as trying a new sport, visiting a new place, or participating in extracurricular activities with peers. And honestly, after school activities, I mean, they're invaluable for kids. And these days, there's so much that we can do with technology and with Zoom that hopefully more kids are being catered to with their interests.
So some things to talk about with your teen. So to party safely, go with someone you trust. Go with friends you trust. Make a plan. My mom did this lovely thing where she would make me call her every hour that I was out at a party in my older teenage years, and that was lovely and worked well. Make a plan to get home. Pour your own drinks. I know that they're coming out with like really cool stuff nowadays, like nail polish that you can dip in your drink, and if it's been drugs, that it will change colors. So kind of just things like that. They also have these things, they're scrunchies that when you're at a bar or at a party, you can put the scrunchie over your drink and it just like sucks onto your drink kind of. So something cool to think about. If you do put your drink down, don't pick it up again. Don't mix substances. This is something that's probably a little more geared towards people who use drugs frequently, but not mixing substances, you put yourself at a much higher risk of overdose when you do mix substances. So we always tell folks to make sure you do your strongest drug first. You can always do more. You cannot take away the drug you do. And we say, start low and go slow. So we're not just doing something that someone handed you all at once.
Right.
Alcohol can affect judgment, which I know we're all aware of. If you're drinking, just be conscious of that. This is a big one that I think a lot of parents are going to have conversations on. So if there's more questions about this particular thing that I'm about to say, please feel free. Not taking a pill from anyone else, even if it's one of your friends that you've known forever and they say, this is a Xanax that I got from my sister, it was in her script, it's totally legit. You don't know.
Right.
You don't know. And you need to tell your child that you need to act as if you don't know.
Right.
It could be fentanyl. We do a drug checking program at our drop-in. And of all the samples, including cocaine, I think 1 in 4 cocaine samples have been coming back positive for fentanyl right now, along with all the different fentanyl analogs. Also xylazine, been referred to as tranq, has been put in a lot of the fentanyl right now, which is not an opiate. Therefore, Narcan isn't taking people out of their nod. Not to say that it's not helping them breathe, but it's not, they're still unresponsive because they're tranquilized, basically. So yeah, just really not taking a pill from anyone else. Like I said, I don't want to be a scare tactic here at all. I think knowledge is power, but we have had maybe like 21 girl come into our drop-in and she was a wreck. She just lost one of her friends right in front of her eyes the week before at a concert. A friend had given her what she thought was a Xanax bar, and it ended up being fentanyl. And she died on scene. No one had Narcan at the concert. So if you don't take anything else home with you at this point, I just urge you to really talk to your kids about these things that could happen. Narcan is an incredible medication. It's completely inert to anyone else that is not on opiates. The only job it has to do is reverse an overdose. We always like to say that it should be no different than having a fire extinguisher or a first aid kit, a CPR, AED machine. And an EpiPen is a great one too. In 2019, 40% of all overdoses that were fatal had bystanders there. So even if you're not someone that uses drugs, if your loved one is not someone that uses drugs, your friends don't use drugs, I still have it in my purse. Obviously I work at a drop-in, but I think it's something that everyone should have on hand and think of it no differently than an AED. So just reducing that stigma of carrying Narcan. Fentanyl test strips is another really good tool. We do have some here if anyone wants to see what they look like or take some. And condoms at all times, and know how to use them. Talk to your kids about how to use them.
I don't know if you're going to mention this, but in Massachusetts, Narcan, you don't need a prescription for. Anyone can go to the pharmacy, including minors.
Yep.
And the pharmacist should be teaching how to use it. And
Yep.
There's self-injections and there's nasal sprays, and obviously the nasal spray is the one you really want to focus on.
Yep. Yeah, so in Massachusetts, there is a standing order, so anyone can go in and get naloxone from a pharmacy.
And you're covered, even if you're getting it to use on someone else.
Yep.
Oh.
And if you don't have insurance,
So if you don't have insurance,
to access that, I know you folks have it, are there other
We have
places
it.
that they can access it?
yeah, so I know Ipswich Housing right now has it. They order it through the state lab. Ipswich Housing also has a nalox box that my team manages and maintains. That is located on the the open door food pantry, the little red shed up at the housing authority. And there's also various nalox boxes around Gloucester train station. Our team just kind of brainstormed along with participants of where the hot spots, so to speak, were, where people go, where they're commuting. We have a lot of unhoused people in Gloucester right now living in the woods. So just kind of putting them in key points along the train tracks as legally as we could go down, and things like that. But if you ever have any issues getting any, definitely reach out to One Stop and
Where would you recommend they go to learn how to administer?
us.
We can teach you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's important. You don't want to wait till you need to do it.
Right.
And then
Right.
figure, now what do I do? I open, what do I
Exactly.
That's
yeah.
right.
Yep.
Yep.
What's a no-lox box?
So a nalox box is something rather new that we got an awesome grant for. And it's just an unlocked weatherproof cabinet,
Oh, cool.
and it can be mounted on a wall, on a pole. It's pretty inconspicuous. It has a QR code, so you can scan your phone, and you can get, it'll bring you to like a slew of training videos and stuff if you want to kind of peruse that on your own. But if someone was specifically interested in getting trained, any one of our staff can go ahead and train. We do a lot of in-services for folks.
There's also a lot on the web. I mean, I'm sure they do it, YouTube and things like that.
Yep.
It's important to encourage people when they're getting it. Oh, go to YouTube, do something, learn
Yeah.
how to use it.
Yeah, so that's something that I really liked about these particular nalox boxes that we have is, it does say, you know, call 911, administer Narcan, rescue breaths. So it does give you like a little bit of the lowdown, but the QR code, and it will bring you to all sorts of cool links and reputable information that's all up to date and everything like that.
Jen,
Yeah,
did
thanks.
you work it out with the Ipswich Board of Health that they're providing it
Yes,
as well?
that was, we got approved by that last month, I want to say. So I was just talking to Colleen from the Board of Health, and we're actually going to get a kiosk for sharps disposal here too for residents.
So that's another place that I think what I'm hearing is that I was alluding to making this part of a party hosting necessity, but now it's sounding like not a maybe, but a definite
Yeah.
party hosting necessity.
Oh yeah, we're more than
Yeah.
happy to get the word out and just shoot the breeze about it, you know. I think just learning about it and just, you know, like, I remember I've been in health and human services for 15 years or so, and up until maybe 6 years ago, like, I never knew what Narcan was. I was like, saw someone with a jean jacket with a carry Narcan thing, and I was kind of clutch his pearls. Like, I was one of those people that just didn't quite know, didn't quite get yet. So I'm more than happy to talk about it all day, and I know all of our team is
The
really
other important
great.
thing is to stress is that Narcan may not be enough. They may need CPR.
Yep.
Yes.
And so that's the thing people keep forgetting. And if the people don't wake up, and if they're gonna be an overdose with an opiate, they're gonna wake up pretty quickly with Narcan, I mean, minutes.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to administer it twice, though.
Oh, yeah, you may need to
Yeah.
give it again, because it depends on what they were taking. If it's methadone, this may go on for a very long time.
Right,
Yeah.
depending if
But
it's a
they're
partial
not
or
waking
full.
up, either they're not an opiate or they're in cardiac arrest, so you wanna
Right.
make sure you're always focused on CPR part of this as well.
Big
Yep.
time. Yep.
Yep.
Great point.
Mhm.
Yeah, so an overdose is a respiratory arrest. It's actually not, I mean, it can turn into cardiac arrest, of course, if they're not breathing for long enough. So we always really, really stress the rescue breaths, getting that air into their lungs, letting the Narcan go to work. This is gonna turn into a Narcan training, which I'll start to do.
We
But
did bring Narcan too.
so if anyone wants to see what it looks like or get some or whatever you want, let us know after. So yeah, that's things to talk about. And then just kind of in conclusion, knowledge is power. I think we can all agree after tonight's discussion is, you know, talk to your kids, educate yourself. Fentanyl is a synthetic opiate, many times more powerful than heroin or morphine. It has, however, been used legitimately for years in hospitals for terminally ill patients. In the US, pure heroin has mostly been replaced by fentanyl. I kind of touched on this earlier with our drug tracking program, as well as the other adulterants, the tranq or the xylazine that's being found in the cut, which is also brings up a whole nother point that Narcan isn't touching it. Not to say don't keep doing it, then you risk putting someone in precipitated withdrawal if they're Narcan too much. So it's a lot to unpack as far as that conversation. But even if you're using clean needles or supplies, xylazine can still cause open sores or abscesses in the skin that take a long time to heal. That's something that we're seeing a lot, like crocodile skin. So it's just these atrocious, skin ulcers, and they're just not healing. So Jen, luckily we have her on board for wound care if that's ever needed. So that's something to be just aware of, I think, for intents and purposes of the discussion. But as Dr. Barrett said, fentanyl is much cheaper to manufacture and distribute than heroin. That being said, I wouldn't worry too much about cannabis and fentanyl. I don't see drug dealers going around and sprinkling fentanyl in cannabis. And nowadays with the dispensaries, that shouldn't be an issue.
Might I add to that, actually?
Please.
I would say in the past half year, 6 months, it's actually quite the contrary, and there was a large influx of fentanyl or fentanyl-laced cannabis, and that's why it became, talked about, because it wasn't like that for quite a bit. So there was a rumor, whatever, but that's what I was like. That was like the talk of town.
And that's super scary, and you know,
I just heard that. And
Yeah,
I
no,
would,
that-
I would like to.
I would
that be the
highly doubt that a
reality.
drug-
I hope it is.
right. Well,
Right.
I mean, you never know, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
So
And
I just
that's-
hate to bring that up, but
No,
know.
no, it's
No,
great.
it's-
Thank you. You know, I would say that's what, you know, for test strips, if people are, you know, not getting their cannabis from a dispensary at this point in time, you know, fentanyl and cocaine, we touched on that, methamphetamine, and definitely the pressed pills. Overdoses occurred because they thought they were taking other drugs. According to a 2019 report, fentanyl is not in street marijuana. Fentanyl is a lot more expensive than marijuana, and it would not make a drug dealer as much money to lace marijuana with it. That being said, there's probably a million conflicting views on that right now.
Yeah.
That was just from this one study. I would say if there is fentanyl on marijuana, my first thought would be that the dealer, it got cross-contaminated from a scale they used or a baggie or something like that.
That was a great point
Mine
you
sounded
gave to
pretty.
me.
Sorry.
Oh, no, that's okay. I didn't even think about that until Lacey brought it up with me. But yeah, no. What were you gonna say?
Yeah, no, that is a very good point. And I was just jumping ahead saying that what I heard personally, you know, the talk was that it was quite purposeful, not to, you know, invalidate what you were saying, of course, because that's quite as common as the contrary, you know, it being purposeful or accidental, you know. I mean,
Right.
I don't know, how do you quantify that? I mean, you know, you can't.
It's
Yeah.
tough.
You just gotta
Yeah,
be aware.
right.
So that's just really
right.
where the tools like the fentanyl test strips come in handy.
Mhm.
You know, when in doubt, test your drugs for sure.
Yeah.
Can you spend a minute just saying what fentanyl's test strips are and how you use them?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So fentanyl test strips, do we have the bag around?
Yes.
They're
I
basically
can
like,
get
it
them.
looks like they're actually urine dipsticks, but you can test drug baggies with them. You don't need a whole lot. You can just have a trace amount. So a lot of the times, like if someone gets a new dealer, I'm always making sure that they have test strips to make sure, you know, if they haven't used for a long time, if they've been incarcerated or they went to detox and they start using, I always suggest, even though it's mainly fentanyl that they're buying anyway, that the opiate person who is addicted to opiates is going to seek out fentanyl nowadays. But yeah, they're little dipsticks. If it's kind of the opposite of a pregnancy test. So one stripe on it means positive, two stripes on it means negative. And it's just as simple as adding a little water. It doesn't need a lot, to either like a cooker, a little corner bag, a pot, and dip it in, and the results are right there for you. So that's especially important if you know, you're out at a party, and you know, in a perfect world, I would love for someone to test their drugs at every party. I know that's not the perfect
These are
world.
available at pharmacies?
We have them available. You can get them through the state lab as well. I don't know if
I'm not
so
sure
this
if
is the
pharmacies
urine
carry
one,
them.
but like I know pharmacies have like the benzo drug test kits and stuff like that too. I haven't seen these particular ones at pharmacies, no.
They're fairly expensive. Each one of these is $1 each, but we have them for free. We have multitudes of them. The state pays for them. And it looks, did you say it looks kind of like a pregnancy test dipstick? You did. So I'm not going to open this one because I don't want to waste it, but there is so we do kits for different things. This is our fentanyl test strip kit. There's a little accordion folding brochure that kind of tells you how to test it, but we at One Stop know how to do that. We've asked our participants how to do it. It does not take that much of the drug to do it. A teeny little bit. You put a little bit of, a shaved piece of pill or a teeny bit of powder in one of these little, like a tea light holder type thing.
Or just like a corner baggie. It doesn't have to be in a container.
Yep.
Add the water, add the drug, let it mix up a little bit, and then dip it in and wait. I think it's 5 minutes for the results. Probably it comes up quicker.
One line is positive, 2 lines is negative. It kind of looks like a COVID test strip too.
Yeah.
A little bit. It's weird. Too many strips these
So
days.
that's the fentanyl one. We do have benzo test strips too, that look just like that for benzodiazepines. This is what the nasal Narcan looks like. It is a 4 milligram nasal spray.
That's expired. Do you want to
Ooh, yeah.
discharge it?
You want to?
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
There is intramuscular. This is just more readily available, easier to use. The intramuscular one, you have to like put together and put the cap on, and then so someone's already freaking out that their friend is overdosing or someone next to them is overdosing. It was really hard to kind of put it together, and you're shaking and you're nervous, and so that's why I was really excited to see this come out. It is a one and done spray, so don't do a test spray. It's just we always say do it in the opposite nostril if you're going to Narcan them again in case there is obstruction, if they snorted something and it's not getting up into the mucous membrane. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it comes in a little bubble pack, and you just peel it right off. There's a little instruction sheet. This part right here is designed to go up into the nostril. Insert it gently. And there is no priming this thing. Once you have pushed the button down here, you hold it just like this, you engage it, and I'm gonna just show you. And that's it. Very,
On
very
both
quick,
sides or one?
just one side.
That's just a one and done, so if you
It
have to
tastes
do
terrible.
it again, you'll do it up the other nostril.
Yeah.
And then, immediately you've already called 911, you've administered Narcan, you want to wait. They say 2 to 5 minutes, but you really want to make sure for the chest rise. A lot of the times with the fentanyl or carfentanil, these really strong opiates, they'll get like wooden chest.
They wake up and 2 minutes later, they start going under, you should do it again.
Yeah,
Yep.
I mean,
big
There's
time.
no harm in you're not gonna overdose someone
Right.
with that.
Right.
Right.
They'll go into like a precipitated withdrawal, so they'll feel like crap, but I'd rather have someone feeling like crap than
Yeah,
And
not
it's
breathing
still on
and,
the high,
yeah,
so
exactly.
It may not be
Right.
happy, but it's also
yep.
They're alive.
So that,
Yep.
they're supposed to go in to the emergency room to be washed in case they do go back out. And yeah, what else? I think
Can I
that's-
ask a question about harm reduction, which we haven't talked about, which I think is so critical? I know there's a perception that working with people who are actively using or giving them a safe place to use is really supporting and increasing the level of use. And I wondered if you could speak to the statistics, and I know we have different countries that have a lot of success with it, and I think we're moving towards doing that here, but you can really talk about, I know people are uncomfortable with hearing that people are using and we're working with them, but just if you can kind of
Yes.
touch on the bridge to treatment, et cetera.
I don't know about exact statistics on safe consumption sites. One Stop is not a safe consumption
Yes.
site. I know at the one in Seattle, I forget the exact name of it, is escaping me. But they've been in business now for over 5 years, and they haven't had one fatal overdose.
If you go to NPR about 4 weeks ago, I had a wonderful whole, I think it was the morning one. And I think if you get online, I bet go to npr.org and that you can find it there too. It's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Oh, okay.
I think it's just so important for people to understand that working with people who are actively using is critical, because you can make the connections, like you said, to get them into treatment or get them onto maybe a program like Suboxone or Methadone. So it's, I think there is a perception that,
We're
helping
enabling
people-
drug
Right.
users. Yeah, we
Right.
we hear that a
And
lot.
honestly, it's the exact opposite. So I think,
Right.
or even, it's interesting, when we had the needles here, there were some comments online, great, we're gonna have more drug users here. And really, it's for anyone, even who's a diabetic, but also if someone's actively using substances, you wanna make sure that those aren't shared.
That's
And
exactly
Right,
right.
so it's a public health initiative
It's a
is
public
what it
health.
is giving someone a clean syringe or, Clean Works safer drug use education. That is not enabling, and I know you're not saying that.
It's-
No,
Right.
that's what I'm
It's
raising
keeping
the
them
hand.
It's
healthy long
keep-
enough to get them
Ex-
eventually, hopefully.
That's
into
right.
Exactly.
something
Right.
that
Exactly.
allows
Right.
treatment.
Yep, and like I said earlier, kind of like that moment of the aha moment or the strike when the iron's hot of, I am sick and tired of being sick and tired, and great, let's make some phone calls. So just having
Yep.
that very low barrier,
Yep.
people to come to, and when they are ready, I think the success rate in these harm reduction programs is skyrocketing as far as getting them into recovery. Because again, harm reduction is kind of that bridge between addiction and recovery. We try to fill in all those gaps and not forget about them and not push them aside and not think that they're bad or they're dirty or they're not worth it or whatever, scary, whatever you think. They're really not,
Compassion and respect,
and
yeah.
you know, I've learned a thing or two from them. So,
Thank you.
is there any questions or anything?
I think it was a great point to bring up at the end, enlighten me a little bit more. So, yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
I'm going to join you up here to thank you for all the enlightening information you just gave, and to thank everybody for participating tonight. And hopefully we've all learned some things that can help us keep our kids safer. That's the main purpose of all this. And improve the health of our community. So thank you all. We'll end on time for once. And
Thank you for having us. We really appreciate it. We hope
Thank
to be
you
back.
so much. Thank you. Thank you.